Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka. You can find me elsewhere online as The Crimson Stitchery, such as on Instagram and Ravelry. I also have a newsletter for The Crimson Stitchery, so make sure that you're signed up for that if you would like to get news and updates from me on a semi-regular basis. I promise I will never spam you. Hi and welcome on a really gloomy November afternoon. Thanks very much for joining me at the Crimson Stitchery. It has been a little while and I will go into the reasons for that later on in the episode. But because it's been quite a few weeks since I last recorded an episode of this vlog for you, I normally do it once a month, I've actually got loads of stuff to talk about. I've been working on so many things over the last few months, as regular viewers will be aware, and some of them have really, started to all kind of come into fruition at the same time. So I'm really excited to be sharing much more about what I've been working on. But just before I get started, I would like to say an absolutely huge thank you to all of my lovely and wonderful supporters over on Patreon who fund this channel through their monthly membership subscriptions. I just wanted to say how inordinately grateful I am for everybody who has continued to support the Crimson Stitchery, whether that's on Patreon or alternatively, if an ongoing subscription doesn't suit you and you prefer to make a one-off contribution. Thank you to my supporters on Ko-fi, and also a huge thank you to people who have purchased my patterns and knit them and shared them. I am completely aware that this is a really difficult time for people financially, the economy, the inflation, the cost of living, all of that is really kind of going a bit out of control, especially in the UK, and times are really tough, especially this winter. So I would like to say a huge thank you, because at the end of the day, I think that we can all do with some more creativity and colour and kind of constructive conversations in our lives. And I like to think that I foster some of that through these monthly vlogs that I do, even if sometimes my episodes are coming out a little bit late. Nonetheless, I am very committed to the Crimson Stitchery, and it's really thanks to supporters that I'm able to carry on doing this, to fund the channel, to spend time designing and creating content, and to continue to run the channel with all of the ongoing costs, which, yes, are only going up. So a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. And if you've been enjoying this channel for a little while and you've been thinking about signing up, then please feel welcome. We're at patreon.com/The Crimson Stitchery. You can check out all of the various different benefits for each tier and choose the right one for you, and really just tap into a really vibrant and wonderful community that exists online around the Crimson Stitchery, and other people that enjoy the kind of themes that I chat about on my channel. Okay, so moving on. As I said, this episode, I know it's a little bit late. I'm sorry for that. I like to try and upload a video once a month, but I just simply didn't manage it this month. So in this episode, I will be sharing some exciting news in knitting and also a bit more on one of my crochet projects, but I am not going to be talking about everything that I've been making since I last recorded and did an episode, because what I decided to do was kind of split it in half, and then I will try and record another episode, with less of a break in between, if you see what I mean, just to try and kind of move things along a little bit. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me. So on that note, me just being late with everything, I also am late with Halloween, and I just didn't manage to do any revelry or go to any parties or dress up. I just did absolutely nothing on the 31st of October. So through November, I've been wearing my Halloween sweater, which is this one that I made a little while back, Arachne by Andy Satterland, which I've made in a rustic woolen spun grey wool that's kind of quite mottled. If you can see there, it's not a flat grey, but it contains multitudes of colours, and one of those metallic blend kind of synthetic yarns for the cobweb. And I did document the process of making this sweater on the Crimson Stitchery a couple of years ago now. Time is flying, honestly, I don't know what's happening. So yeah, late with everything, including Halloween. And yeah, I'll draw your attention to my kind of obnoxiously green nails. They are actually kind of fluorescent. They sort of in the right type of light, they do start glowing. So yeah. So my knitting basket is next to me right here, looking pretty full, as you can see. So yeah, on that note, big announcement is that I have a new design available. It was published under Making Magazine's gifts issue or holiday issue. And yeah, it's ready. And what it is this little knit dicky. And that is the title that the magazine gave it. I had come up with this sort of flowery name and concept, but they just decided to label it, call it what it is on the tin, knit dicky. And a dicky is basically a kind of hybrid accessory garment in between a cowl and a scarf, and kind of almost like a mini poncho in a way. But the idea is that you just pull it on. It fastens at the side with two little ties, and that is just to keep it in place, to stop it like flapping around underneath garments and so on, and just to kind of keep it in place when you're moving, when you're walking around. And yeah, here it is. I had loads of fun developing this project back at the beginning of the year and through the spring. So it's going to be in their gifts issue, like holiday gifts, and that is digital only. So it's not normally Making Magazine is like a beautiful print publication, but this, I think just for ease and speed, so that you can just download the patterns and print them off and just make them up really quickly. And I took inspiration from a log cabin quilt through this project, where basically, you kind of start at one place and you knit. You knit, I'm trying to explain it without like the sample here, but I've got all of the swatches. So you knit like one piece, then you pick up, knit another pattern, then you rotate it, pick up, knit another pattern, rotate it, pick up, knit another pattern. And so it's like lots of kind of small little pieces that keep you going and feel very, very Moorish in terms of the knitting. And this project, actually, it took such a long time to develop because me being me, I had to make it complicated. So you can see this absolutely enormous pile of swatches that I created for the design submission. 1, 2, 3, 4 for the original submission. And then when I got the yarns that they wanted me to use, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 10 swatches. And the reason for that is because the piece really explores different types of knitted stitch patterns. Here we've got a sort of brick stitch that uses slip stitches, and it's really thick and squishy and waffly. We've got one of my favourites, a garter rib, a kind of garter background with a slip stitch column rib there. And then we've got this alternating slip and a single stitch rib, which is the same as in my birch ply socks pattern, which is a really popular socks pattern of mine, and a bit of plain stocking stitch just as a reference. So it's extremely gloomy in here because it started getting dark at basically 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's just gradually the light is dimming more and more. So I'm struggling a bit with the light, but that's November for you. So the reason why I knit so many swatches is because this project, as I said, it was inspired by the way that you sew a log cabin quilt, or you can knit a log cabin square as well. But it was also inspired by stitch samplers, just kind of embroidery stitch samplers, where you try out lots of different patterns on one piece. And so I wanted to combine those two ideas from stitching, from quilting and stitching into knitting. But obviously all of these different stitch patterns actually produce such different fabrics with different textures and qualities, and that affects the gauge, right? So that's why I had to knit so many swatches so that I could figure out exactly how the recommended yarn in question behaved in each circumstance. And so the result of that is basically certain stitch patterns are kind of tighter than others, and they're a bit stiffer, so maybe you want to go up a needle size, and others are looser and floppier, so maybe you want to go down a needle size to tighten up the fabric. The gauge is it's within a sort of group, like boundary, but it does fluctuate slightly between all of the different stitches as well, despite changing needle sizes. And I've detailed all of that in the pattern. So yeah, hopefully that means that I'm the one that did all of the hard work and figuring out, and that anyone then knitting the piece can just, you know, plug and play, just follow my instructions, follow my lead. Or, you know, if you're noticing that you've got a different knitting style and a different knitting tension and things are working out differently, hopefully you feel empowered just to adapt accordingly, because yeah, that's really the message of my channel, really, that you need to figure out how to knit the best way for you, whilst being open and you know, willing to experiment and have the curiosity to play around with different techniques. At the end of the day, there isn't a one size fits all, really, and it's up to you to take charge of your own making process and practice. So yeah, that's really what the Crimson Stitchery is about, and I try and encourage that through these vlogs, through talking about how I approach patterns and pattern adaptations, as well as like tutorials and tutorials where I go into things in more technical detail. Yeah, so many swatches. So I was working on that like all spring. It's one of those things that, like, you know, you think that the deadline's really far away, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, I've got to send it to the US and it could take 3 weeks, and I need to get this done and I need to get it dry and blocked and so on and so forth. So it was like frantic knitting wool, like in the heat of summer. And I did mention these swatches in a previous episode too, when I was talking about like this kind of soft fawn gold colour sort of being beige, and we were talking about whether or not I would look naked if I wore a jumper in this this yarn colour. And it's funny because obviously I talked about that in the summer when I had caught the sun and I had a bit of a tan, and now it's the winter again and I've gone really pale. I feel like actually I could pull it off, and suddenly it's like it's looking like a completely different colour, and I'm a different colour as well. So there you go, that's that. So yeah, they've called it Knit Dicky, and it does come in several sizes. It is graded, and yeah, I just hope that you have fun playing around with it. It's kind of like a small sweater, basically, just without sleeves, because you do have like a body, a collar, you know, it's got this big rolled neck, it's got these ties, it's got all this finishing and so on and so forth. So, you know, actually, like, there is a lot of finishing, which it was more time consuming than I realised, but then at the end of the day, you don't need to make sleeves. So it's quicker in that sense. I'd actually initially come up with it as a submission for another publication, and it got rejected, and I thought, oh, this idea, I really like this design. I've got to keep working on it. And I could have self-published, but I saw at the time a few more like design calls, so I just reformatted it, changed it up a little bit and sent it off to other publications, and it did get accepted by Making. And yeah, it's just a kind of slightly different and fun accessory that I made. I would really like to make some more unusual accessories. I do have another pattern that was published in Pom Pom magazine quite a while ago, like nearly 10 years ago, which was like a hooded scarf. And so now I've got this Dicky that's published with Making magazine. And, you know, one of the many, many, many ideas I have on my list of things to do for the Crimson Stitchery once I finish my PhD, is I want to make an accessories collection where I just kind of look for like the weird and wonderful types of accessories that are out there and create knitting patterns, and then write the patterns up as a booklet that are sort of bound together by maybe like they're all in the same yarn or the same colour or something like that. You know, for example, like a balaclava. Or actually the other day, I was in a shop, like a clothes shop, and there was a member of staff who yeah, I'm just going to assume that she's Muslim, because she was dressing kind of quite modestly, basically, and you know, she had one of those like headbands that people wear underneath the hijab to kind of cover the hairline, like, you know, cover it all up, and then, you know, often people wear a hijab on top of that. But instead of a hijab, she was wearing a knitted balaclava on top of that, and I thought that is so cool. And she really looked great, and like she just looked really like she had quite a simple outfit, like a long black top and like long loose black trousers, and then she had her like headband covering her hair, and then she had her knitted balaclava. But this is what I mean. I'm assuming that she's Muslim, but maybe she's not. Maybe she just was cold. I don't know. But yeah, I thought that was cool, and like a nice way of seeing knitting being styled in that kind of in a sort of more of like a fashion, everyday style kind of context. Although this person was at work, so yeah, there you go. So yeah, like I've got my hooded scarf, so I'd like to rework that pattern, like a balaclava, or maybe like some really long gloves or short gloves, or like those mittens that flip up and down, and like different types of hats, different shapes. So yeah, you know, honestly, there's so much I want to do with the Crimson Stitchery, but these things take time anyway. So that is that's a new design. Let me know what you think of it, and if you knit it, please get in touch and let me know how you get on, because I am always excited to see how people interpret my designs. On that note, I will mention, so for the last 2 winter seasons, I've been doing these design collaborations with another independent knitwear designer. So the first year I did a collection with Diana Waller, and we designed accessories inspired by festive foods and confectionery. So I have the brandy butter hat, the ginger snaps gloves, and Diana did a colourwork hat called Lebkuchen and fingerless gloves called Pepperkaka. And then the winter that's just gone by, I did a collection with Françoise of Aroha Knits. And we did our collection about the Maori New Year, even though that is actually in the Maori, you know, in the New Zealand Southern Hemisphere winter, which is the Northern Hemisphere's summer. But even so, you know, we talked about Matariki, the festival of stars and stargazing. But I'm not going to be doing that this year. Things have just been too hectic. I really, really wanted to, but yeah, I've been doing the time that I would have spent developing that collection, I spent on the artist residency basically, and it's like, you know, you can't do everything, you have to make certain decisions. But the reason that I just brought that up now is because talking about like interpreting other people's designs. One of my Patreon supporters and someone who's quite active within our Discord community recently made a version of my brandy butter hat, and she did it by holding together 2 yarns, like a kind of pinky red and a cream, and marling them, and it looks so good and it's so different from the original. And as soon as she showed it to me, I was like, oh my god, I've got to do one on my own, and I just absolutely loved that. So that's one of the advantages of, you know, project sharing sites like Ravelry. It's a shame that they've had sort of ongoing web accessibility issues for different people. But yeah, that's one of the advantages, isn't it? Like being able to see how other people have knit designs, and if people have taken the time to like write up their project notes and so on. So if all of my designs are listed for sale on Ravelry, as well as separately on Payhip if you don't have a Ravelry account. So, but if you do have a Ravelry account, I do encourage you to upload pictures of anything that you've knit from one of my designs, because I would really love to see it. And yeah, it's just so exciting for me as a designer not to feel like I'm kind of on my own, but actually that like I'm working with you guys, like a community of other knitters. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with me, Gabby, and thanks to anyone that if you've made one of my designs, thanks for adding it to Ravelry. Okay, so aside from that, as I said, I've been working on various different things, but I'm not going to talk about everything in this episode. But one thing that I have been working on in my knitting basket is my crochet scraps project, and I'm just going to go ahead and reach in and grab like a completely random assortment of the scraps. Since I started this project, probably a good year ago now, I think the colour palette has shifted quite dramatically. It was much brighter and now it's gone quite moody. And that's just because I'm using all like scraps and leftovers. So it's about what's available to me. But I've got like moody colours with like bright hints of texture. So this pink is a pure silk yarn. And then the dark blue is like an alpaca, so it's kind of soft and fuzzy. So like fuzzy and shiny and yarns that are sort of somewhere in the middle of those 2 ends of the spectrum, if you like. Texture spectrum, quite like that idea, texture spectrum. Yeah, and this has been a really nice thing to do because it's crochet, and I always associate crochet with just relaxing. and almost like not doing anything that important because it's quite flexible. And, I could make all these granny squares. And the idea is that they're going to be a haori or some kind of approximation of a haori, which is basically a Japanese garment that's like a very loose over jacket. That's made out of sort of rectangular pieces that are stitched together with a collar. So yeah, the idea is that they're going to be a haori, but they might, they don't necessarily have to. Like, you can just sit and make a bunch of granny squares and it could become a cushion, or it could become a blanket, or a rug, or a pair of trousers. I don't know, like, what can you make with granny squares? So yeah, it's been a really nice thing to do as an alternative, because at the moment it feels like knitting and work are quite kind of bound up together, and it's important to do something else for relaxation. This is something that I've realised, discovered the hard way over the years. Like, when you make something that you're passionate about and that was your hobby that you're doing in the spare time, when that then, you start to take it more seriously and it becomes a form of work and labour, then, you can't just be doing that all the time, because it means that it's not that you're doing what you love all the time. It actually means that you're working all the time. And it's important to dissociate, I think, just kind of break away from things that are associated with deadlines and expectations, and just do things for the sake of it, just for the sake of playfulness and fun. And knitting is playful and fun for me, but also I have to be quite switched on about it when I have to be taking notes, or, working to spec and working to deadlines. So crochet is the opposite. So that's great. I'll just show you a random selection. So there's that one. That one, just dropping them on the floor. That one's kind of a bit musty. That one, then I go a bit turquoisey. And we'll see what they look like when they're all done. Yeah, as I said, the colour profile of this piece is kind of constantly shifting, and that's quite exciting. So I like to kind of lay it out every now and then. So this is the one with a big yellow middle. So I did a few of experimenting where, instead of doing every round being a different colour, I kind of made it quite a lot more blocky for a few of them, but I don't think I love that. I think every round a different colour is a classic. Then here we've got some multicoloured hand spun yarn that was given to me by a viewer. More on that next episode, more on that multicoloured hand spun yarn. So yeah, as you can see, another block, a full block. And I just, every now and then, I just like to put them all on the floor, shuffle them around, and start building out the shape of my haori through the crochet blocks. Here's my little post-it. I realised, this is the plan for the pattern. So that's the back, the sleeve comes off, and then the front in two pieces. And I basically realised that I've had to make it kind of bigger and bigger as time has gone by. And at the moment, I thought I had to make 48 patches I've written, but now I've gone up to 60 because, just because I wanted to make it longer. It was getting a bit too cropped, and I wanted something that I can just throw on over me, almost like a dressing gown, like a shorter dressing gown. The idea is that it will just live on the back of my office chair, my work chair, office chair, the chair that sits in the corner of the living room, right next to me right here. Office chair, honestly, who am I? I don't have an office. But it just hangs out on the back of that. And then when it gets a bit colder and I'm working from home, I can just throw it on really quickly and just shuffle around. At home in it. So that's the crochet granny square haori. Really looking forward to that. I think I'm getting there. I've got 10 or 12 more squares to make. Then I have to crochet it together, which will take a while. Sewing in the ends will take a really long while. And then I have to make a collar neckband. I am slightly worried that I'm going to be running out of scraps. So that's why I'm not in a rush to finish this project, because, as I work on other things, that will free up more leftovers in yarn that can then be absorbed into the haori. So it's kind of good, actually, in a way, that it's taken such a long time to do, because it means that it means that there's more yarn for me to use, rather than doing what I used to do, which is naughty, which is claim pre-scraps, as if you things you kind of, when you steal bits and bobs from like sweater quantities of yarn and you use those first before you've knitted the sweater, because what would happen is that I'd then make the sweater or the socks or whatever it was and then be short and then have to fill in with another scrap, and it would just be this like ongoing chain of dominoes, yarn dominoes. Yeah, so those are the two projects that I wanted to share with you today. They're actually both quite big projects that have been like quite significant. So that's that. As I said, there will be more next time, so just hang on for that. And then for the last section in Conversational Threads, I just wanted to mention a few more things about my exhibition. So if you are new to the Crimson Stitchery and you haven't caught up on the last two episodes from August and October, since the summer, regular viewers will know I've been doing an artist residency and research placement. Now, I am also a PhD student as well as an artist and designer, and I basically did a sort of secondment. I, took time off my PhD because I got this wonderful opportunity to be the inaugural artist in residence at the archive of the Botanical Gardens at Kew Gardens here in London. And I was researching some of their archival materials that had recently been catalogued and are now being digitised. So, those of you who are watching who are from a library and archives background, I know we've got a few librarians at least, and we do have some academics as well. You'll realise what a sort of exciting opportunity this offers for those kind of institutions to kind of invite researchers and artists to kind of look at these materials, maybe reinterpret them or find new and or hidden meanings within them. And it's just a way of, making sure that all of these historical collections, really stay relevant. In a way, it kind of justifies the safeguarding of them. So I was doing that project, and as I said, it was an artist residency as well. So I was devising creative responses and really developing my practice. And the long and short of it is that all of this has been culminating in me curating an exhibition about the research that I was doing and also featuring my creative work alongside. And, for anyone that doesn't know, because I was certainly completely naive, curating an exhibition is a lot of work. It's so much work and like coordination and like communication and admin and paperwork and sorting stuff out. Like I said, I didn't quite realise what I was getting myself in for. And the exhibition has now opened. We had an opening, and then I'm starting to kind of send off like the sort of publicity materials and stuff like that around it. Really, that is why I've been kind of quite quiet on the Crimson Stitchery ever since I started this residency, because my brain was very, very, very full. That's been the last 4 months, and I am approaching, the last kind of section of the placement now, and things are starting to quieten down. And I kind of, it's sad, but also sort of kind of a bit of a relief. But overall, I've been trying to very much live in the present and just do what I've been capable of doing. So the archival materials that I was working with was all about kind of, so it's all about East Asia basically, and it's about how the presence of kind of Europeans in that region, or not just Europeans, like including Americans and the British, Westerners, basically white Westerners in that region, increased greatly through the 19th century. In China, it followed China's defeat in the Opium Wars, and then Japan had their own kind of opening up policies in the 19th century. And basically there was this huge network of figures across the region. They didn't just stay in one place, but they moved all around the region, like China, Korea, down to Taiwan, like just all around the whole region. Yeah, so there was this whole network of figures across the region, basically, many of whom were interested in botany and plant collection, either on a professional or an amateur basis, because it was quite a hot topic during the 19th century, botany and like natural sciences. And so those people would correspond with Kew Gardens, and they would send back plant specimens, they would send back reports if they went on like expeditions and so on and so forth. And sometimes like Kew would ask or encourage like people to do certain expeditions, especially in the west of China towards Tibet. And the reason for that is because the Britishers, imperialism, like China wasn't formally a colony, or apart from Hong Kong, but the reach of European imperialism across China basically occurred through a series of what are called treaty ports. So they basically had British-controlled territories, and I think there were like French ones as well, throughout the region. So although it wasn't like formally a British colony, like it's still very much functioned under British imperial rule. And so what the Britishers wanted to do was basically create or develop a land trade route between China and India, because India was formerly a British colony. And so there were all these expeditions where they would like go across towards Tibet and then try to like get over the mountains and like connect up like through like Sikkim and Nepal and India and so on. And then like often there'd be like some botanist like tagging along, or people on those journeys would report back to Kew about the botany that they had been witnessing and the kind of knowledge that they'd discovered, a lot of which obviously required close collaboration with local people and generous knowledge exchange and sharing. And, often in these reports that I was reading, there'd be comments like, oh, no, the Chinese, they've got no problem sharing all of this information with us. They don't think it's important to keep it to themselves kind of thing. And I think it's really about the sort of two different value systems kind of going around each other, because essentially the British imperialists wanted to, the way that they viewed China was as a market, as a sitting market, for which they wanted to sell as many goods as possible. Obviously the largest and most significant impact of that trade being opium and opium addiction as a result. But actually there were loads of other things that went on as well. One thing was, for instance, they wanted to sell like cottons, like the British wanted to sell cotton cloth to China, and then that kind of ended up usurping the local production of cotton. Like, so people were no longer like just producing cloth, whether that's from cotton or other plants, including like ramie or hemp or whatever. They weren't necessarily producing it in their communities anymore, but they were then buying bolts of cotton for the profit of these British agents. So that's like all of the research that I've been doing like in great depth. And then the artist response as well was that I, had so many conflicting feelings about all of this kind of stuff. And also I was like pulling out, when I was looking through these materials, I was pulling out like responses and reactions that other people were not, or other researchers were not, or maybe it's because of my like positionality, because I have Chinese heritage, but more really because I research diaspora. It's my area, it's my academic area, it's what I researched my PhD. So that was kind of making me very, very alert to some of the themes and tropes in these materials that other researchers who just were looking for botany, or who were looking for history, in a sort of more simpler way, were not necessarily aware of. And so it was all of those observations and really the feelings and the sort of nuances and contradictions that I wanted to weave through in the curation of my exhibition. So I did that through how I selected objects, how I wrote captions for the objects, and then my artist responses. So I wrote a load of music. One of the pieces is a piano piece, and then it kind of goes along the spectrum of like song kind of inspired things, sort of music and sounds that I made through like live looping. And then it goes to this recording I made where I wrote a poem and I kind of performed that in different ways in the recording. So it kind of starts with like just pure music, and then it goes to pure words, and then there's two more pieces in between that kind of start to break up those two the two ends of the spectrum, if you like. And yeah, so we had a launch. Everyone bought the headphones, listened to it. It was really fun to play music. And I've been promoting the exhibition on my personal Twitter, like that I use for academic stuff, and also on my personal Instagram account, Asawa Telling, which I keep separate from my knitting Instagram account, which is the Crimson Stitchery. And people have been asking me if they can, like, if there's any online content for them to engage with about the exhibition, or if they can view anything. And the answer is kind of. At the moment, as it stands, so the exhibition has a companion webpage where, like, you can read the titles and the captions of the objects, but you can't see photographs of the objects, and that's due to, like, you know, copyright and stuff like that. But you can listen to some of my music. So the recordings, they are a little bit rough. I had to do them quite quickly in the end for various reasons. But I like to think of it as a kind of starting point for me to continue developing my artistic work rather than a kind of finished project, because, yeah, this whole endeavour has been about development. And yes, there is some knitting in the exhibition as well. There is the knitted Rami sock that you'll have hopefully seen on the channel as well, that was an artist's response to a over 100-year-old Rami sock that I found in the archival collections. So whilst, you know, the exhibition, it's not a virtual exhibition, it's an in-person one, I will put some links down below here. And also, like, I have some blog posts that I've written. One's out already, another one will hopefully be coming out in coming weeks. And I'm also going to be making an audio podcast about my artistic work. So when that's ready, you know, I'll put that down there as well. But the best way to keep up to date is through my newsletter. I'm a bit behind. I'm behind on everything. So I haven't sent a newsletter out in a while, but it's just the best way to kind of keep in touch. And it's where I will collect together all of these disparate, links and places to go online. So do sign up for that if you haven't done already. I'm going to wrap up this episode for today. Thank you so much for watching. And again, a big, huge thank you to everybody who supports the Crimson Stitchery, including my regular Patreon community. A shout out to my supporter at the Crimson Queens tier, which is the highest level. Thank you so much, Angie Scheitel. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. As usual, a bit of making, quite a lot of rambling. Thank you for bearing with me. I know that the Crimson Stitchery, it's changed quite a lot in the last year, because it was last November that I basically had a bit of a meltdown and realised that I needed to seriously scale back on things, and kind of just to accept that if I wanted to do everything, it's just going to take a bit longer, basically. So I've just had to only work within my own capabilities and try and sort of respect my own need for rest and sleep and pause and time out. And maybe I'll talk about that in another episode again. But thank you for being here. I hope that you are well. Thank you for watching.